always great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Sorry I can't be with you in the studio. How is Christmas looking for my viewers this morning?
Well, good morning, Kay. We're still in the national lockdown measures, as you know, but they will come to an end on the 2nd of December. That's a legal certainty. If they were going to be extended, that would have to be by a vote in Parliament. It's our hope and expectation that that won't be the case and that people living in England will be able to move back into the tiered system. There will be a review. That work's undergoing as to what those tiers look like and how local areas will go back into them. That will very much depend on the data, and we'll have to make decisions nearer the end of the month once we've got the most up-to-date information possible to make those decisions. So it's too early to say which tiers people will be able to go into, but we all want to see a significant easing of the measures in all parts of England at the beginning of next month.
How optimistic are you?
Well, I'm always optimistic. I hope that that's the case. That's the government's expectation. People have been working very hard over the course of this month to comply with the new rules, and we are starting to see some positive data in most parts of England. There are some places where the cases are continuing to rise, but there's positive news in many places. Of course, the data that we're seeing today does have a lag time of a few weeks, so we're only just, if at all, starting to see the impact of these new national measures. And that's why I think it's fair to say we won't be able to make a definitive call until the end of the month, because it'll be at that point where you can really start to see what the true impact has been of the hard work that's happened over the course of November.
One of the options, I suppose, would be this vaccine, or several vaccines that we're hearing about. The Moderna one was the one that was in the headlines yesterday. Did the government order enough of that?
Well, it's ordered 5 million doses, which is a lot of doses, and that also comes on top of the very substantial number of doses we ordered for the Pfizer project as well. The vaccine task force that we've got has done a fantastic job over the course of the last 6 months. It's not put all of the UK's eggs in one basket. It's tried to pre-order as many doses as it can in as many of the more viable, credible options that are available to us. Of course, we have our own homegrown one with the Oxford AstraZeneca project as well, and assuming that comes to fruition, we'll have a very significant supply from that. So piecing them all together will give the UK a very good stock, and we'll be one of the best placed countries in the world. But in each case, it will be some time before those vaccines are fully tested for safety and go into production, and that varies by project. The Pfizer project does appear as if some vaccinations will be at our disposal for use by members of the public before the end of this year, albeit perhaps only in small quantities. The Moderna project, very, very good news from yesterday, but that won't actually be available to us until the spring. So that's a bit more of a long-term project, by which time, hopefully, some of the other vaccine programmes like Oxford AstraZeneca will be available as well.
And by the spring, only 5 million doses. That's what we ordered apparently yesterday. In September, a broadcasting colleague of mine was told by the government that we hadn't bought Moderna because the US wouldn't do a deal outside the US. In August, the EU bought 80 million doses with the option to buy 80 million more. Japan and Canada bought hundreds of millions of more doses. Was it a mistake, in hindsight, for us not to have ordered more at the time?
I don't know, it's difficult to judge. From the information that I've seen, the UK is actually one of the best placed countries in the world because we have bought vaccines from a number of different manufacturers. If you look at the Pfizer project, we've got, I think, 40 million doses. You have to take 2 doses of that vaccine, so you're looking at 20 million individuals. So that's a very substantial proportion of the population. It looks as if we're well placed, and the real challenge will be how quickly can we get these vaccines and how can we roll it out in an efficient and sensible and fair way across the country. I don't want to raise false hope because it's going to take time both for these vaccines to be safety tested, to be produced, and some of them are quite, that in itself is a complex process, and then for us to start to roll them out. But the last 2 weeks have been a real source of hope after a very challenging period. that next year will see us beginning to vaccinate the most vulnerable people, key workers, and then the wider population. And we can begin to get back to some semblance of normality over the course of the year.
OK. YouGov poll saying that 2/3 are likely to take the vaccine if offered, which means 1/3 are not likely to. The Health Secretary was pressed on that yesterday at the news conference at Number 10, and he wouldn't go as far as to say whether or not it would be compulsory to take a vaccine. Do you think it should be?
We're not in favour of making it compulsory. We don't have a history of that in this country. What we want to do is win the argument and educate people and persuade them that taking the vaccine is the right thing for them and their family. Of course, there has been a recent history in this country of those people spreading misinformation about some vaccines. So there's work to be done by the government, by healthcare professionals to win that argument. But I very much hope that we will do. And certainly I would advise anybody to do so. I'd advise my own elderly parents to take the vaccine if it's available to them. And I'd take it myself at the right time when it's available to me.
OK.
So I think that's the best approach, to be honest, rather than forcing people to take a vaccine against their will.
OK, Health Secretary, top tip, don't call your mother elderly on the telly. Seriously. She'll have something to say about that later on. Are you, as far as devolution is concerned, is it a disaster?
No, it's not. And that's not what the Prime Minister was saying. The Prime Minister's always supported devolution, but he is at heart a unionist. And he is very troubled by the rise of nationalism and separatism in the form of Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP. And that, I think, is the comment that he was making yesterday, that whilst in some parts of the United Kingdom, devolution has enabled local people to have greater say over their own destinies, to make different and the right decisions for their communities. One of the downsides in Scotland has been that it's been misused by the SNP to drive a wedge between people who are ultimately part of the same country with hundreds of years of history of friendship and partnership. And the PM is very concerned by that. And you can see that in the actions that the government's been doing, whether it's the UK Internal Market Bill that's currently going through Parliament, which sets out to strengthen the union, to make it easier and more certain for goods and services and people to travel around the union. Those are the sorts of things this government's going to do to strengthen the United Kingdom in the years ahead.
He used the word disaster, and he said that it was Tony Blair's biggest mistake.
Well, the disaster that the Prime Minister is referring to is the rise of separatism and nationalism in the form of the SNP. Any of us who love the United Kingdom, who believe that we should stay together, that we're much stronger as one union, believes that it's very disheartening to see people trying to break up the union, trying to take any opportunity to sow dissent and grievance where there is none. And the Prime Minister is absolutely determined, as is the whole government, to keep the union together and to do everything possible to persuade our friends and neighbours in Scotland that they are better off, to remain within the United Kingdom. And that is the mission of the government in the years ahead.
Are you proud of Scotland and Wales having their own parliaments?
Well, I think it's a choice of, it was a very long time ago. It was, I was a teenager when that happened. This is a choice by the people of Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. They democratically chose to do that, and I completely support that. We as a United Kingdom government work extremely closely with them. I work, although my department is predominantly focused on England in terms of housing, communities and local government, I work with opposite numbers and partners in the devolved administrations, and will continue to do so. The government is trying to support them through coronavirus. You see that with some of the big initiatives that we've done, like the furlough scheme, which is for the whole of the United Kingdom, like the purchase of vaccines, where we're doing it for the whole United Kingdom. And that's absolutely right. What I don't like to see is the leaders of some of the devolved administrations, principally Scotland, trying to find opportunities to drive us apart. I think that's deeply unhelpful. I've never been attracted to separatism or narrow nationalism, and I think we should all fight against that.
You say that they democratically chose to have their own parliaments. What about if they want to democratically choose whether or not to be more independent?
Well, that would also be a choice for the Scottish, the Welsh, or the Northern Irish people. I would strongly campaign against that if that was the case. I don't see there's a realistic prospect of that. Of course, we've had a referendum in Scotland, and Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond, the then leader of the SNP, said that was a once-in-a-generation opportunity which passed and should be laid to rest for many years. I can't for the life of me see that now would be a sensible time, as I think Gordon Brown said earlier in the week, to be reopening those questions. At the moment, the whole of the United Kingdom should be focused on beating this virus and our economic recovery, because millions of people's jobs and livelihoods depend on the actions that we as the United Kingdom government can make and the devolved administrations can make themselves. But we are infinitely stronger together as a United Kingdom. The power of the UK Treasury, for example, has been very clear throughout this virus in the way it's been able to support millions of people's jobs in Scotland, as it has in England and the rest of the United Kingdom.
But what about if the people of Scotland and or Wales want to democratically choose otherwise?
Well, I think if your question is should there be a second referendum in Scotland, then my answer is that I don't think that this is the right time to do that. The leaders of the SNP themselves only a couple of years ago said this should be settled for a generation. And as I say, any politician who wants to spend time on questions like that at the moment, when we're in the biggest health crisis since, for generations, and we're facing a very, very significant period of economic disruption, I think is frankly deluding themselves. They should be focusing on the priorities of the public.
Yeah. I suppose Nicola Sturgeon might say the same thing about Brexit, but she's not on the show today, so I can't ask her. What I can do is ask you about social housing. Tell me more.
Well, thanks, Kay. After the Grenfell tragedy, my predecessors and I in government worked with some of the survivors and the bereaved of Grenfell to think about how we can put in place much stronger regulation for the 4 million households living in social housing, because there was a real sense that people's genuine concerns had been ignored, that they hadn't been treated with dignity and respect by their landlords, and that people in social housing were somehow different to those in the private rental sector or homeowners, and we wanted to change that. So today we're publishing the fruit of a long period of hard work, the Social Housing White Paper, which sets out a much stronger and tougher consumer regulation for people living in social housing, whether that's through housing associations or other social landlords like local councils. So if you have concerns, you can raise them, your voice can be heard, and you can get proper redress. And that should mean, in the years ahead, better quality service, safer accommodation for people living in social housing. I think that's a really important step forwards.
Okay, safer accommodation. Just while I've got you, I know you have to dash Housing Secretary, but what about a word for the families and survivors of those that were caught up in the Grenfell disaster? Yesterday it emerged that fire tests were rigged in relation to material used on the building.
Well, I watched some of the testimony last night from the former employee of the manufacturer of that product, and I have to say it was very, very shocking to hear an individual admitting that the fire safety test was actually rigged on a very important material used on the building. I will have to learn more as the inquiry goes on as to whether that was a one-off or something that was more widespread within the sector. But my view is that building safety regulation and standards in this country have been far too poor for too long, and we need to decisively change that. We will next year be legislating through our new building safety bill for the largest, most significant change in building safety laws for about 40 years. And of course, there's a huge amount of work now to do to remediate buildings, particularly tall buildings like Grenfell Tower, which have got materials on them which need to come off so that people can feel safe at home. Okay. We are making progress on that. Around 80% of the buildings that have the Grenfell style cladding on them have now either had it remediated or there are workers on site today beginning that work, but there's a lot more to do.